hi, folks. Well, isn't that typical? You catch Sty standing out here, standing around, cup of coffee in his hands again. Time for a Sty story, okay? Now, this is a follow-up. This is a follow-up to my last Sty story. That one was called, That's Fried, Not Poached, where I kind of told you folks about an incident I had with a game warden that mistakenly decided I was a poacher because I had collected a roadkill. He was quite the unreasonable kind of character. I mean, you just couldn't reason with the man. And so check that story out so you can get the front story to this one. Now this story has to do with an individual that I knew, a friend of mine, that he was pretty upset with what happened with me. And he was upset with some of the things the game warden had done with some other local folks. He's just had a bad habit of going after the common, smaller folks around town, and we had serious poaching problems out there. Some game violators that really needed to be addressed. People were taking bears for the gallbladders, and there were people up poaching mountain goats and big ram sheep, bighorn sheep, and he just didn't seem to deal with that. He went after all the little guys for the smallest little things, and well, this friend of mine, we'll call him George. Well, George was fed up with the way this game warden dealt with the people of that area. So George said, I'm going to take care of this problem with this guy. I didn't know what he meant. Nobody knew what he meant. Well, it was about maybe 5 months after my incident. I was in town at local cafe having some breakfast. And there's a game warden. He's sitting at the counter. Nobody's sitting near him. Nobody seemed to like the fella. And all of a sudden, here comes George pulling in with his pickup truck. And he backs into the parking area, right smack in front of the restaurant, right next to the game warden's driver's side of his pickup truck, of the game warden's truck. He came in, sat next to the game warden, and he said good morning to the game warden, and the game warden gave him a dirty look, didn't respond or nothing. He never was very cordial, this fella. George thought nothing of it. Well, the game warden didn't like him, didn't like George, so he paid his tab and he left. Well, when he got out to his pickup truck, he looked in the box of George's pickup truck, and here's a skinned-out carcass, a rolled-up hide, and blood all over the tailgate of the pickup truck. He come back in there. He slammed George against the counter, and he brought his arms around, put him in handcuffs, and he said, "You're under arrest for poaching." And we're just shocked. We're just like, whoa. And George says, well, now, wait a minute. He says, let me explain. And the game warden said, I don't want to hear anything from you. He said, you'll have your time. You'll be able to say what you want in front of the judge. He says, you're under arrest, and that's all there is to it. And he took George out to the pickup truck, read him his rights, and, you have the right to remain silent. But George kept saying, but I need to talk to you. I need to tell you. And he says, no, I don't want to hear it. He says, you're going straight to jail. So he took the carcass and the hide, threw it in his truck, along with George, and off they went to jail. Well, at his arraignment, he said he's not guilty. And the judge says, well, then it's going to have to go to a jury trial. Because the game warden wanted to throw the book at him. He wanted them to serve some time for this one. Well, so George tried to talk to the district attorney. He said, if you listen to me, you could save the county a lot of money, the state money. You could save me a lot of time. He says, because there wouldn't even be a trial if you listened to me. And the district attorney said, well, no, we're not. We'll see you in court. You have your day in court. You'll be able to say anything you want in court. And he said, well, fine, okay, let's go to court. So his court date came up, and we went to watch his hearing. Well, after the district attorney had the game warden testify that how he found this guy with this deer in the back of his truck, and George just smiling all the time through all that. And when it was his turn to cross-examine, he asked the game warden, he says, now you're sure that was a deer? The game warden says, I wouldn't be a game warden if I didn't know what a deer was. Just kind of cocky. So George said, well, okay, fine, it's on the record that you knew it was a deer. And he says, no more questions. Well, then it was George's turn. Well, he called one witness, a professional witness. Well, the man was a professor of husbandry. And he taught at the university of that state. He got him on the witness stand, and he called in the evidence, and that was the carcass and the hide. Well, the game warden had brought it with, and they brought that carcass in a big plastic bag. It was frozen, laid that on a table, and then they brought the hide in, and they set that, and that was in a big plastic bag, set that on the table. Well, George asked the fellow, can you take a look at that carcass and that hide and tell us what that is? And, well, the district attorney objected. He says, that man doesn't know anything about wildlife. He's a professor of farming. And the judge said, well, no, it's overruled. He can look at it and tell us what he thinks it is. Well, the fellow got down there and he looked at it, at the carcass, then he rolled that hide out. And he looked at that hide, and he's rubbing his hands on it. He gets back up, sits on the witness stand, and he says, it's not a deer. And George says, well, if it's not a deer, what is it? And he goes, it's a goat. And he goes, a what? He goes, it's a goat. It's a Nubian goat. He says, the hide's the same color as a deer, and it's got white on it, and it's got that same reddish-brown color. He says, but the hair is different. If you really look close at it, it's not the tubular hair of a deer. It's a finer hair. But it looks a lot like a deer, but it's not. It's a goat. It's definitely a goat. The judge couldn't believe it. The district attorney says, I object. I think that should be all thrown off the record, blah, blah, blah. The judge looked at him, took that gavel, and slammed his desk and said, case dismissed. Now, mind you, this was a jury trial. They went through the whole process of getting jurors. All those jurors are sitting there like, what just happened? The judge says to the jurors, you're all dismissed. You can go home. He looked at the audience and then back at the DA and said, if you and that game warden never bring anything like this in front of me again, I'll throw you both out of here and never hear another case. Well, when George got up from his table to walk out, he stopped and looked at that game warden and he said, well, Mr. Game Warden, doesn't that just get your goat? Talking to George later, found out he had it all intentionally planned to get that game warden's goat, and he did. And that game warden had the worst day in court he's ever had. And he was never considered credible after that hearing. So there you go, another Sty story. Follow up to what happened to me. You know, what goes around comes around, I guess. So there you go. Thanks for watching. Hey, check us out at wildernesssthriving.com. Jim and Rory say hi, folks. And this is Sty North saying, you all have a really nice day.